Hello everyone, my name is Alan Rhodes, and I'm a research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in the Earth and Environmental Sciences area. I would first like to thank the Atmospheric Rivers Processes, Impacts, and Uncertainty Quantification session organizers for the opportunity to speak today. I would also like to acknowledge my numerous co-authors over the last year for all of their insights and encouragement regarding the work I will be presenting today. The title of my talk is The Shifting Scales of Western U.S. Landfalling Atmospheric Rivers Under Climate Change, and I will highlight results from our recent manuscript that was accepted in a special issue focused on atmospheric rivers in the AGU Journal Geophysical Research Letters. Atmospheric rivers, or ARs, are critical to Western U.S. water supply. As shown in a recent study, 50% of annual precipitation totals in California come in a select number of days. In fact, it was shown using meteorological station data and reanalyses of products that in the southern portion of the state, that 50% mark is reached in 10 to 40 hours, and in the northern portion of the state in 60 to 120 hours. Importantly, the most extreme rainfall events are usually associated with ARs and can drive a large fraction of the annual precipitation totals, upwards of 30% in the southern portion of the state. Although ARs are critical to the Western U.S. water supply, the most extreme ARs can also be flood-inducing. To better quantify the beneficial versus hazardous aspects of ARs to water resources, Marty Ralph and others recently devised an AR impact scale. The scale relates an AR's maximum IBT, or intensity, which correlates well with maximum precipitation rates, with an AR's duration, which correlates well with storm total precipitation. ARs that fall within category 1 or 2, highlighted here in blue and green in this figure, are primarily to mostly beneficial to water resources, whereas category 3s can either be beneficial or hazardous, they're highlighted here in yellow, and category 4 and 5 are primarily to mostly hazardous water resources, orange and red. As shown in a recent study by Corringham et al. In 2019, these AR cats also correlate well with flood damages on a logarithmic scale, where category 1 ARs have a median flood damage of $100,000 and category 5 ARs have a median flood damage of $260 million, but can also reach up to several billion dollars. Corringham also showed that ARs account for 84% of the flood insurance losses across 11 Western U.S. states over the last 40 years. A natural question to ask is how climate change may shift AR characteristics along this AR category scale. As shown in a recent review paper by Ashley Payne and others, the nature of ARs will change in a warming world, but these changes are dependent on the thermodynamic and dynamic processes that play out across global and regional scales, and may result in impacts felt differently across the 8 regions in which ARs play a major role in the local hydrologic cycle, as shown in the figure in the upper left-hand corner. Thermodynamic changes arise from feedback such as the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship, which acts to increase specific humidity with warming and ultimately enhance AR conditions. Yet these enhancements can be offset by dynamical changes, which may shift the historical location of storm tracks through modifications in the strength and variability of the jet stream, and may act regionally to reduce the meridional and zonal wind speeds and diminish AR conditions. These two alterations may also impact the precipitation efficiency of ARs as they make landfall and when they are orographically uplifted. However, the authors noted that despite the strong theoretical basis, there is still a need for more modeling experiments. To potentially address this modeling need and understand how atmospheric rivers may shift along the AR-CAT scale under climate change, we devised a variable resolution-enabled community Earth system model simulation. Our VRC-SM grid is shown in the top left of the slide and coincides with a maximum resolution of 28 kilometers over the North Pacific and a global resolution of 111 kilometers. This refinement domaining was chosen to encapsulate all origin determinants locations of ARs. The VRC-SM simulations were also conducted with AMIT protocols, or in other words, fully coupled atmosphere-land simulations with monthly prescribed ocean conditions. The CAM 5.4 spectral element dynamical core is used in the study, with time-step subgrid scale parameterizations and their sensitivities informed by our previous work in the Western U.S. The newest version of the land surface model, or CLM 5.0, with satellite phenology was also used. For the historical simulations, monthly observed sea ice and sea surface temperatures are used, whereas the future sea ice and sea surface temperatures are derived from a bias-corrected, fully coupled CSM1 simulation. Greenhouse gases and aerosol forcings are derived from CMEP5 and assume the high emissions or RCP 8.5 scenario. We note more details about our VRC-SM simulations, such as the simulated years, the core hour costs, and the output frequencies that we output in the table. We also in this study validate our model against the newly released ERA5 reanalysis dataset over a comparable historical period. So we have two 30-year periods in which we simulate, one being 1984 to 2015, another being 2069 to 2100, and we throw out the first year as spin-up. To evaluate ARs in VRCSM, we employ the Tempest Extremes AR detection package, or more specifically, the Spline ARs and Stitch Blobs algorithms within it. Spline ARs utilizes 5 parameter choices, which attempt to isolate ARs from the background IVT, as shown in the upper left-hand corner here, and outputs a binary masks of 0 and 1s of either AR or non-AR conditions. Stitch Blob then takes these binary masks from Spline ARs and stitches them in time and space based on self-imposed overlap constraints related to the number of time slices between binary masks and or the grid cells in which they overlap. A novel extension developed for this study uses these Tempest Extremes outputs and computes the center of mass pathways of ARs over their lifetimes, as shown in the lower left plot, and then accumulates all AR life cycles over a given season or an annual time frame, and stores various AR origin determinist metrics. For more information, I point you to our AGO journal article in JGRA. For the current study at hand, we also, once ARs make landfall, compute individualized Ralph et al. AR categories for each AR. And then we store things like max IVT, the AR duration, and the storm total precipitation generated by the AR, among other things. Now that our methods have been laid out, we will discuss some of the major findings we made in our recent study, published in the AGU Journal Geophysical Research Letters, with the QR code shown here. We first discuss our validation of VRCSM against the newly available ERA5 reanalysis product. Shown in the figures in the upper left-hand corner of the slide are all landfalling ARs, indicated by a dot, overlaying on the Ralph et al. AR category scale. Although VRCSM does show some comparable AR characteristics with ERA5, such as the number of ARs over the North Pacific, longitude of origin, and total AR lifetime, the number of ARs that make landfall over the coastal western US is larger in VRCSM by about 11 per year. And the landfalling maximum IVT reached and the duration of the AR at landfall are all higher. As a result, ERA5 shows a much more constrained estimate of the highest AR category occurrences, particularly Cat 5 events. We note this as ERA5 is a new reanalysis dataset that hasn't yet been used extensively in the literature. Therefore, qualitatively, we compare to the aforementioned Ralph et al. And Corringham et al. Studies who use the MERA2 and NCAR reanalyses, where they provide also AR counts. As shown, ERA5 also underestimates when compared to them the Category 5 events. So although VRCSM still might simulate too many Cat 5 ARs, there's better agreement with these two reanalyses. Aside from an increased number of ARs at higher AR cats, there is a general agreement in AR seasonality, as shown in the figures on the right, where 30-year AR counts are binned by their maximum AR cat reached for each water year month. The most active AR months are November through December in both VRCSM and ERA5. However, VRCSM does have a more active AR season in the spring season. We now show our future end-century high-emission scenario projections, highlighted in red, compared with our historical simulations, highlighted in blue, using the similar Ralph et al. AR category scale scatter plots on the left-hand part of the slide, and the seasonality histograms on the right-hand side of the slide, along with summary statistics in table form on the bottom of the slide. As shown in the plots on the left, a significant shift in ARs that are mostly or primarily beneficial to water resource management, or category 1 through 2, to mostly or primarily hazardous to water resource management, or category 4 through 5, occurs with a number of unprecedented ARs at end century, or in other words, ARs that fall off the Ralph et al. Category scale. As shown in the seasonality plot on the right, a marked increase in the number of landfalling ARs across all months of the water year occurs, with ARs more regularly reaching Cat 3 through 5. In fact, a more than 3 times increase in the Cat 5 occurrence is found at end century, and every month of the water year experiences at least one Cat 5 AR event. Now recall that in Corringham et al., Cat 4 and 5 ARs that make landfall in the western United States were associated with median flood damages that were between $200 million and $260 million, respectively, and in some instances exceeded $1 billion. implying that at end century, ARs could become routinely more destructive. We now show all VRCSM-based results of AR landfall location and inland penetration in the bottom two rows, compared with ERA5 in the top row. Each map shows the AR cat reached in each grid cell of the western US over the 30-year periods. Each column shows ARs bin by their common maximum AR cat reached. In general, the historical VRCSM-based results agree with ERA5 on the location and inland penetration of ARs across AR cats. Although ERA5 and VRCSM agree that AR Cat 5 events predominantly occur in the Oregon and Washington coasts, again, VRCSM also shows more events occurring further south in coastal California, such as the San Francisco Bay Area. With that said, the future VRCSM-based results show that nearly every region of the coastal western US was impacted by a Cat 4 or 5 AR at least once over the 2070 to 2100 period. Analogous to the AR count plots shown previously, we now show binned AR versus non-AR precipitation 30-year totals, further broken down by AR cats across each water year month. AR contributed precipitation is shown above each histogram, and differences between the historical and end century simulations are shown explicitly in the figure on the right. A net increase in precipitation of 22% in the 30-year precipitation totals is projected by end century. Non-AR precipitation totals are slightly yet significantly increased by 7%, whereas AR precipitation totals are markedly and significantly increased by about 260%. Although average AR contributed precipitation to the precipitation totals increases from about 28% in the historical to 41% by end century, the increases are not evenly distributed across AR categories. For example, in the historical simulation, AR category contributions to AR precipitation totals are more evenly distributed across AR categories. In contrast, end century contributions primarily come from category 4 and 5 events, or 67% of the contributed precipitation. Importantly, we did not find any single end century Cat 5 AR event precipitation total be historically unprecedented. Rather, the increased number of Cat 4 and 5 landfalling ARs at end century, and in particular back-to-back Cat 5 AR events, drives the precipitation total changes. This is made more apparent by computing the maximum monthly precipitation totals, which when computed for the end century period is nearly double that found in the historical. Though we note that this finding may have been influenced by our use of 6-hourly average outputs rather than say instantaneous or maximum, it is a notable finding. Further, if we normalize the changes in precipitation totals by the coastal western US mean surface temperature change in the simulations, our VRCSM results project a precipitation total increase of about 4.6% per Kelvin. This is physically consistent with the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship, which sets an upper limit of 7% per Kelvin. However, we show that non-AR related precipitation changes are significantly lower than AR related precipitation changes. So in summary, we sought to answer three broad questions in this study. First, is VRCSM a viable modeling option to explore landfalling AR characteristics over a near-term historical period? We found that VRCSM agrees on some aspects of AR characteristics with ERA5. However, there were important differences with higher category AR frequency. However, we also showed that other analyses using different reanalyses datasets showed that ERA5, similar to its ERA interim predecessor, may underproduce AR events, particularly Cat 4 and 5 ARs. Our next question is, how much do landfalling AR characteristics change between the historical period and end century period? And to do this, we use the Ralph et al. Scale to ground the results. We found by end century there is an increased number of landfalling ARs across all months. Cat 5 is possible in all water year months, for example. And a significant shift in AR categories from mostly or primarily beneficial to mostly or primarily hazardous to water resource management is projected, with a number of ARs that fall off the AR category impact scale. The last question we sought to answer is how do changes in landfalling AR characteristics influence the nature of precipitation? So we showed at end century a net increase of 22% in the 30-year precipitation totals was found, predominantly from AR precipitation. No single end century Cat 5 AR event precipitation total is historically unprecedented. However, the increased number of Cat 4 and 5 landfalling ARs, and particularly back-to-back Cat 5 AR events, is. This results in a maximum monthly precipitation total nearly double that found in the historical period. And with that, I would like to thank the Department of Energy Office of Science for supporting both the Cascade and Hyperfacets projects at Berkeley Lab, which enabled this research. I again thank the AGU session organizers for allowing me to speak today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.